Hey guys! So, today we're going to talk a little bit about a subscriber question I got yesterday, which was basically, so Frederick, I'm considering whether or not to take a formal education. I go to one of the universities here in Sweden actually, and I'm a little bit worried because I've looked at some of the comments on the specific course, and some of the students who've taken this course have been very unhappy with the quality of the education. So should I go that route, or should I try to be a self-taught programmer? So let's get into it. You see, this is an interesting one because I wrote back to this person. I'll basically try to relate to you what I told this person, or rather my thoughts about it. And the first thing I felt I needed to touch on was this basic thing. I mean, if a school is offering, second-rate education, and that's not great. But the question is if the people who are leaving these comments can be trusted. Because there is this is the eternal struggle between the education system and the students, because the education system can always argue that the student isn't putting in the work. The student, on the other hand, can always argue that the education system isn't putting enough work, or that the quality of the education isn't good enough. And this eternal struggle is a big problem because you can never really prove which side is right in this. So the way that, and this is what I said, like the way that I think about it is that it doesn't really matter all that much if your education is bad or good or bad, because at the end of the day, the education that you are receiving has to be in some way relevant, at least, to the subject that you are studying. Then there can of course be varying degrees to that quality. But what's interesting is that for this person, the decision was between doing this thing, like going to this course or this university, or being self-taught. Now, the thing is that I wonder if, I asked whether or not this has been all that thought through, because regardless of if you go to a university or if you do self-studying, you're going to have to put in a certain amount of hours. You're going to have to put in a certain amount of time into your own personal development. Now, you can either do that completely alone, just basically going to different websites on the internet and doing studying as an island, or you can do that as part of a formal education. Now, if you do it completely by yourself, you're going to have to first and foremost, you're going to have to figure out what's relevant for you to know in order to get a job. That's number one. And if you go with an official education, at the very least you should be able to trust that it has some type of relevancy and connection to the actual industry. I mean, if it doesn't even have that, now that's a bit of a problem, but I find it hard to believe that there's an education out there that is labeled software development where you won't even at least learn like object-oriented programming, or I don't know, MVC, like these sorts of things. So, because the way that it worked for me, and I will argue that this is true for probably everybody who's ever gone to a university. I mean, how many people can claim that their education was exactly what they were looking for? When I started with my class, we lost 3/4 of our class by the second year from drop-offs, and people left for all kinds of reasons. Everything from it was not what they expected, it was too hard, they wanted to do something else, and so forth and so forth. I mean, I was sitting there with the few people who were left, and I kind of just went, all right, so we have less people, great. We have more time with the teacher, so that I can start, I can have more time with the teacher, so I can study even harder. And that's the thing that I think is important to remember when you're talking about education quality. You don't really know, guys, what quality of education you will get when even if you take a boot camp, guys, even if you were to try to be self-taught, even that is going to be a little bit of a gamble, because you don't know, since you don't have the experience to determine whether or not this is good quality material or not, or good teaching. You're still going to have to bet on it. That's why you have fancy schools to begin with. Fancy schools and like very classy brands, because it is a brand. Schools have a brand, and they sell that brand to everybody around you. And that's the thing that I think is important to remember here. A official education, guys, does not necessarily mean that you just out of the box you're going to be better at something than somebody who's self-taught. But the value of having that on your CV as a junior is fairly high. You have to weigh that value, because people will pay attention, just as if you had worked for a really prestigious company. I mean, if you are a junior and let's say you put in 2 or 3 years at, say, Google, do you have any idea how valuable that is for the rest of your life? Career-wise, you're fairly set if you can keep your skill level up, because people will notice that, because Google is a very prestigious company, just as Microsoft and Apple and all these companies. And the same thing goes for fancy schools. And even just having an official degree weighs a lot heavier than being self-taught. I'm sorry to say. That doesn't mean that being self-taught is a bad thing. It's just that most companies favor looking at that, favor seeing that sort of thing. And some companies even have it as a hard requirement that you have to have an official education. And for someone who is living here in Sweden, where there's no tuition and education is basically free, I told them, I don't really see the reason why you wouldn't get an official education, even if it's not the best one in the world, because it's still time that you would have to invest. I mean, nothing's stopping you from going to class in the morning, which is what I did, and then learning, say, whatever it is that you think is going to be a good supplement to what you're studying in school in your spare time. That's what I did. I had my own key to the lock on our school, and I was usually in there 3 hours before class even started, studying JavaScript and Node and all that good stuff, even though the course itself was mostly focused on Java, because I had already decided that I was going to do everything I could in order to be a software developer. It didn't really matter to me what I had to do that, because I put in as much work as I humanly could in favor of this ambition. So I argue that the same thing was true, and this is, I finally just said that, to me, going to a university versus self-studying is very similar to trying to lose weight. You can either be at home and do home workouts by yourself, or you can go to a gym where you have access to a personal trainer. It's just two different approaches to reaching the same goal. In my experience, the likelihood of succeeding is higher if you go to a gym with a personal trainer. But at the end of the day, you still have to put in basically the same amount of work. So that's the way that I think about it. And your experiences may differ. But hopefully it gave you some insights. Have a great day.